All right, good evening.
Good evening.
How is everybody? We're pretty sure we're going to wrap up our series tonight.
Yes.
And so as we're waiting for you guys to come on and get ready to say hello to you, I want to begin to rehash a little bit just because I know that some of you will have already heard, and some of you guys will find this later on probably YouTube.
Or Facebook.
Or maybe you're watching this on Think Differently Academy, which would be awesome.
Who knows?
So somewhere out there, if you're hearing this, you have found this. And I want to say, you're watching this because anyway. But so we've really spent, I guess, 5 or 6 weeks now talking about sex and sexuality, starting really with a rant that I did a couple weeks ago just about the myths of male sexuality in the Christian world, and the ways that I think men and women are both lied to about the whole picture of and dynamic of sex in intimate relationships. Mm-hmm. And specifically really talking about, and tonight's topic really is going to be an important one for this, talking about the way that men are taught that they will always be emotionally immature.
Yeah.
And no one comes right out and says that, mm-hmm. but they'll say things like, well, you're visual, you can't help yourself. You can't help the way that you respond. You'll always lust because you're a man.
Boys will be boys.
Boys will be boys. And all that's bull crap.
That's true.
And so, as we talk tonight about talking kids, that's the perfect time to start early, helping both men and women understand both self-management, self-responsibility, and the potential for both emotional maturity, which then results in relational and therefore sexual maturity. So that's kind of the path we've taken to get here. And it's so crucial because both men and women alike have really been poisoned by that particular teaching and belief system.
Yeah.
I've seen several different times where women say, once I heard that about men, I couldn't see men the same way again. And that's not a positive thing. They just start looking at men through this terrible lens of, you mean that's how they're thinking about things? And I'm like, no. I mean, some might be, but let's not put that on every man on the planet because of masculinity or maleness.
Right.
So we'll talk. We'll dig into that deeper as the evening goes on. But
and for those of you that maybe your kids are grown or you don't have kids, and it's like, oh well, this is just a talk about how do I talk to my kids about sex and stuff like that. It might be something really helpful for you too, because I was a kid once. And I didn't learn about sex and sexuality in a healthy way. And so, it's like these kinds of conversations, even though we're saying, hey, how to talk to your kids, I think it's always helpful where, you get to learn more about yourself too.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is kind of one of those things where if you don't really know it well unless you can teach it to a 5th grader. So I don't know that fully applies, but at least the topic of talking about sex, to really understand, kind of the concepts and the ideas and the ideology around sex and sexuality, we ought to be able to bring it down to simple conversation and meaningful ways to say important things to people of appropriate ages, which let's talk about appropriate ages for just a minute.
Yeah.
Here's the thing is that, and it's hard for me not to think this way because I did all my graduate education as well as undergrad in both psychology and marriage and family therapy. And so we don't always think in terms of the developmental process of kids' learning capacity and what they're capable of and what they're capable of learning. For instance, 6, 7, 8-year-olds are much more concrete, and it's much more difficult for them to move into more abstract thinking. And so when you talk to someone at those younger ages, under 8 years old, about things that are abstract in nature, they're not going to grasp the abstract nature of that. They're simply going to hear the basic building blocks of what you say. They'll take things literally that are metaphorical. So if you're in a conversation with an 8-year-old and under, and for a variety of different reasons, the topic of sex comes up. Either someone talked to them about it, they saw something on the internet, a friend said something or did something to them.
Or a sibling.
It's still important to be able to talk to the child. But what you don't want to do is go into a long, detailed explanation of the kind of things we've talked about for the last 6 weeks here. You want to talk to them about, and by the way, this is going to be true at every stage in the conversation. concepts as much as you want to talk to them about what they'll experience, what it is, and what it means.
Yeah.
There's a number of people in my generation, the other people, my parents talk to them. Didn't really get any teaching about that often. And so when you talk to kids about sex, the first thing you've got to be thinking is, where are they developmentally? What are they really capable of learning? And what is the experience they're going to have or have been having? And speak to their experience, not to concepts and broad kind of, diagrams and pointers and felt boards and,
TV shows and something on PBS. And just real quick, Margie, you're saying it's breaking up on your end. Is it clear now? Because our internet just got interrupted for a second.
Yeah.
So
God bless our internet.
Yeah. Bethany, you're saying that too. Okay. Hold on, you guys. I'm going to change this over. Sorry. So there's going to be a pause. So if you guys will hold on for a second. And there. Okay. Okay, we're gone. Okay, now let's try it.
So let us know if we're on.
Yeah, it shows that 14 of y'all are still there. We lost several people. Sorry, y'all. Fixed. Thank you, Taylor.
Okay, so you guys got us? All right, thanks, Taylor. Appreciate it. So let me back up, and you guys do let us know. Good, thanks, Bethany.
Awesome.
Let me just kind of recap what we've said so far, and that is that when you talk to children at any age about sex and sexuality, you want to think not about concepts and diagrams and anatomy and biology nearly as much as you want to think about their experience. In other words, what might they be seeing and hearing, and what experiences might they have both ahead of them, and if they're talking to you because they've had some kind of sexual experience either imposed on them, or they're starting to have sexual feelings and they talk to you about it, which is great if they come talk to you about it.
It's so good.
What you want to be able to do is think, well, what are they experiencing? And most of the time, young children, very young children, are going to be very confused about sex because, again, they're concrete thinkers, not abstract thinkers. And they will think about physical things more than emotional things. Well, it's still important to talk to them about having felt kind of weird, felt uncomfortable, whatever they felt. It's also important to help them kind of think through boundaries and whatever, based on what they come talk to you about. But let's back up and talk again. I started this particular evening talking about, we started weeks ago with this rant about kind of the myths about sex and sexuality. I want to tell a quick story that kind of, to me, lights a fire under all of the things that we do wrong when we talk about sex and sexuality. I've shared this before, I think, but there was a day when I was invited to teach sex to a middle school class of special needs kids. my oldest son Ian, who's probably watching, and if not, he will be watching soon. Was in a class in middle school in Abilene, and the teacher asked me and one other guest to come talk. Coach went first, and I went second. So I sat in the chair because I wanted to hear kind of what they were hearing before I got up. And the football coach got up, and his first phrase was this: I want you guys to understand, when it comes to sex, don't put your hands in the nasty places. Okay, all right. So that was the start of his talk, and I cringed my way through the rest of the talk. And, it underscores for me kind of, again, it goes all the way back to we talk so much about sex from the perspective of what's wrong with it and what not to do and how to prevent bad things. I think it's super important that we provide kids of whatever stage and age we end up talking to them. And I'll talk about some ideal ages.
Yeah.
But whatever stage and age we talk about sex, I think it's crucial that we provide them a couple different things. Number one, the safety of knowing that this conversation is not about them messing something up, but it's about them understanding something that's very important in their lives and in the human race. Number two, it's about something that you want to provide information both for their protection, but also for their ability to engage that part of their life with all the things it's designed for. And so again, so much of how we've talked about sex in general is about what not to do. So when we talk to our kids about it, we tend to talk biology. Here's all the body parts, and here's what not to do. Don't do it till you're married. And so somewhere in between that conversation and the day they're married, the journey that they go through in their own kind of sexual thought process, their physiological development, and their relational / experimentation really is a path that's fraught with peril. I wanted to use that phrase. Fraught with peril, because we don't provide a map of experience. We provide a map of forbidden fruit and a map of things to avoid more than we provide a map of here's the beautiful gift that God's given us. Let's kind of back up then and talk about the gift. And the way that we talk about it in general is this idea that God is a one become two become one kind of God. And that when he made Adam, he had Eve inside of Adam and took the one, made them two, and invited them again to oneness. And the idea being that masculine and feminine nature, though separated, come back together in an increasingly connected way, so that ultimately that connection is that the two become one again. And what we say is that the sexual act, the act of sexual intercourse, not just intercourse, but all sexual engagement, is designed for connection. At the heart of what sex is designed for, it's designed for connection. The other thing we say, and this is super important, is that sex is the only act I know of that engages body, soul, and spirit. And by soul, we mean mind, will, and emotions. So it engages body, mind, will, emotions, and spirit in both people in a single activity where all five of those parts become one when sex is functioning the way that it's given to us. And so fundamentally, sex is a connector. It's a way to bring two into oneness. But it's also sophisticated, and it's filled with emotions and rich emotions, because that's part of the soul. And it's filled with thoughts and ideas and creativity and generosity, which is part of the mind. And it's filled with the willingness to be mutually generous and mutually submitted, which is the will. And then obviously the body, but then the spirit's also right at the core of that, where in that moment of connection and kind of those heightened moments of connection, body, soul, and spirit become one. It's designed then to be the perfect picture of Christ and the church, to be the perfect picture of God and his people, and that oneness that comes from that. Now, think then, with all of that and the power of that inside the human body and soul, all of the ways that can go wrong. And so, but what we end up doing is talking about all of the ways that it can go wrong instead of really trying to go, here's what's right about it.
Yeah.
And so what we would say then to young men and young women, I remember we talked about this the other night. I remember as a young man having no idea that puberty was a thing and I was about to go through it.
Yeah.
Like I found out from, various sources that it's normal that my body hadn't changed in the 5th grade, but that any day now I should expect a sudden and relatively drastic change. And sure enough, that relatively drastic change happened within, a year. So I think that pre-puberty, like right before a child goes through that change, is the ideal time to talk to them about sex, because part of the conversation isn't just about what happens between two people, but about what happens inside a person.
Yeah.
You will have heard us in the series say that the primary sex organ of both a man and a woman is the brain. And when we teach people about penises and vaginas, see there, I can say the words.
Yeah.
When we teach people about body parts and not about thinking and feeling, then what happens is people get the implicit message that sex is about body parts and not about thinking and feeling. But I think it's important to begin the conversation with a young man or a young woman somewhere before puberty hits. Now, I understand sometimes puberty hits suddenly and like a bolt of lightning before you expect it.
Yeah.
But generally, ages 10 to 12,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes earlier, sometimes later, somewhere in those ages, a child's body is going to change because it's designed to. There's an intended flow of hormones that takes place in both men and women that starts changing the child's body to grow and develop secondary sexual characteristics, such as hair in various parts of the body. The man's voice changes. The woman's body changes to a more curvy body that's preparing the woman's body ultimately to both carry a child and nurse a child. But both men and women develop what's called secondary sexual characteristics, or we might think of that more as adult, developing the kind of roots of adult sexuality. And so the male's voice changes, musculature changes, the woman's body shape changes, and both male and female have this kind of added flow of hormone that does a couple of things. Number one, it increases the level of emotionality of both genders.
Yeah.
Both genders feel a lot more kind of intense emotions and often confusing emotions. But then the other thing that comes with that change is a heightened both awareness of and feeling of sex and sexuality. Mm-hmm. In other words, along with those hormones comes sex drive. And that's why, if a child doesn't know about that ahead of time, and all of a sudden their body starts to change. Oh, and also with the woman's body, there's another change that happens.
Oh, you mean menstruation, periods?
Yes. Yeah. You mentioned the other day, we should probably talk about that.
Yeah.
You want to hit that a little bit?
Yeah. Which part though? Oh, about the knowing before?
Yeah, just talk a little bit about periods.
So, when young girls, if, just kind of going into the puberty and then, understanding it's like, okay, we're going to have a period. But if you're like not educated in it, one of the things I learned is, it's really important for our young ladies to know what's going to happen and being told by their mom or by somebody that's raising them. It's like, this is going to happen to your body, and having that connection. And I've been told that if your kids have it before, you've told them, there can come shame or like actually a break in trust. It's like, this thing happened to my body and you didn't tell me it was going to happen. And so like I was actually hiding my panties in my granny's closet because I thought I was dying. And my granny found them, and she's like, "No, baby girl, you're having your period." I'm like, "Ma, what?" And it was like terrifying for me. And I got the teaching of biology. I got sat down in front of a PBS movie that showed, this is what happened when, sperm is released and impregnation and all that kind of stuff. And I was probably 8 years old when I watched that. And so, my brain's very concrete. it did not like take all that and go, oh, that's me, you know.
And this is what it'll feel like, and I'll wake up one day and this will be happening.
Yeah. And so, but you know, it's just that, and with periods come the ups and downs of hormones, the female, you know, just different emotions. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to navigate this, or I'm super tired, or, you know, just different things happening.
And this is why we say talk to kids not about biology and anatomy, but talk to them about experience.
Yeah.
Here's what's happening right now. Here's what you're likely to feel. Here's, as you begin to feel those things, here's some thoughts you're likely to have. One of the things that I always tell kids, because occasionally parents have hired me, I'm not in the business of that these days, but occasionally parents have hired me to have the talk with their kids. But one of the things I always tell kids and parents, by the way, is coincident with puberty is one of the major steps of individuation.
Yeah.
Right. So it's actually this design of kids moving emotionally away from their parents to become independent emotionally, mentally, physically, in all those different ways. That puberty is one of these great biological leaps forward where they begin to feel. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why adolescents tend to be so at odds with their parents, is because they begin to feel kind of the sense of, you know, I know things, I'm smart, I've got this, I'm finally an adult at age 13, you know, and so there's, along with those chemical changes are the emotional changes, not just of sexual desire, but also a sense of impending adulthood, or what may feel to them as like actual adulthood.
Yeah.
And so they'll start to talk, you know, I like I'm in charge of my life, and if I'm not, I should be. And, you know, that negotiating of that stage, it's important if you can tell them ahead of time, hey, there's coming a point when you might start to think of me as not, you know, not as smart as you think of me now, or you might really get mad at me about things. And it's important to know that that's a part of you growing up. It doesn't mean that we don't like each other. It doesn't mean you don't like me. It just means you start to think for yourself more and more and more. So in talking about experience, we want to talk to kids about both what they are experiencing and what they're going to be experiencing, to the degree we can anticipate that.
Yeah.
So with bodily changes, like Polly said, for a young woman, it's crucial that she understand not only is her body going to change, but she's going to have to learn to manage some new things in her life when she starts having her menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
For a young man, he's got to understand that, you know, this thing that happens in a young child's life consistently, but really becomes a greater awareness when a young boy starts to have erections. And those erections aren't just an event, but they start to kind of call for more of his attention, like an increased awareness of that.
Yeah.
And along with that comes that increased sex drive and that thought process comes on a female side. But because a young man's penis is on the outside, it tends to be quite evident in some visual and exterior ways that, you know, good grief, I'm feeling some things, not just emotionally, but my body is now expressing some things in new ways. And then along with that comes, you know, awareness of those things, and the season of life where a child begins to, at least in many cases, learn about and or think about or discover accidentally masturbation.
Yeah.
So these are all things that a child's experiencing. And if what they get is a flannel board presentation about wombs and impregnation, there's not a lot of help for them in managing the actual experience of developing sexuality. So what you want to talk to them about is you're going to feel some things, you're going to think some things, your thought process will change, the way you feel about your parents will change. That's normal and to be expected. And we'll walk through that together. We always will love you. You will always love me, but you might feel differently about that. But then at some point you want to talk about part of what's happening is that your body's preparing itself for this amazing thing called sex, right? And in that, don't let me forget to come back and talk about masturbation.
Yeah.
In that, you want to talk about, you know, the design of sex, not so much what not to do and the things to avoid, but why God gave it to us. And if we can help people understand that God gave it to us for attachment, connection, and oneness, it'll be much easier for them to think in terms of what are the boundaries and protections, not simply because it's wrong to do, which isn't the point at all. It's right to do when it's protected and safe. Yeah. But rather to say, here's what it's designed for and why we guard something that's precious and beautiful. And by guarded, I mean we want to develop our understanding and our capacity to share it in the right time and the right place.
Yeah.
So when we talk about forbidding things, I think we all understand that for the most part, and this isn't about adolescence, this is about the human race. For the most part, anything we forbid, our desire for it increases.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It's what Paul tells the Corinthian church when he says the strength of sin is in the law. He's basically saying, make a rule, everybody's desire increases.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we teach sex and sexuality from the perspective of the do's and don'ts, we simply increase the likelihood that people will begin to ponder and think about, oh, they said not to do this. Want to go do this?
Yeah. Why should I not do that? I'm so curious about that.
And then that curiosity develops into experimentation, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So what we want to talk then about is more about the fact that it's part of your job to learn to manage. Is our internet still working?
Oh.
It's part of your job to learn to manage that in such a way that you take good care of both yourself and the people that you care about. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things you'll learn is that you'll have a lot of feelings that you need to learn what to do with those feelings and how to manage those feelings in such a way that you care for people well. Mm-hmm. So that what we don't tell them is, look, you're a boy, and as a boy, you're going to lust all the time, and you really won't be able to help yourself. So just try not to do it too much. Yeah. And just when you look at a girl, just bounce your eyes away. And what we teach them is that, when we do that, we teach them that girls are dangerous to a man's thoughts, as opposed to teaching a man that he's fully capable of developing self-management. Mm-hmm. Self-management, and again, helping people keep in mind that if the primary sex organ is the mind, we want to teach them that they can think whatever they choose to think about sex. And when they choose to think about it as something that's given for them for connection, it's a lot easier to protect it and to only assume that it belongs in a relationship based on connection.
Yeah.
Now, listen, I'm not naive. I don't think that's the solution to all the potential experimentation that's out there. I'm just saying that we want to plant a better seed in both men's and women's mind to say the expectation isn't that you're about to get out of control and you'll be, you won't be able to manage yourself, but rather that you'll have some really strong feelings and some really strong urges. And part of your job is to learn what to do with those so that you can love well. Mm-hmm. And then as we talk about sex, we also talk about, probably at those stages, it's more important to talk about relational management than it is to talk about intercourse and the various body parts and the fear of pregnancy and the fear of social or sexual diseases. Yeah. Those may be conversations that need to happen if the immediate concern is that your child is on the verge of experimenting with sex. Then you do want to talk about kind of the range of not only is sex made for connection, but it's also how humans reproduce. And so if you're having sex with people, then reproduction can happen. Mm-hmm. And that's an important, you want to talk about those things, but not as this is the reason not to.
Yeah.
It's a possible consequence, as is sexually transmitted diseases, et cetera. But the real reason to guard your heart or to guard your sexuality is to guard your heart and to guard the heart of the people that you care about.
Yeah. I think it's important to not involve shame.
Yes.
In sex. God says if you have sex outside of marriage, it's a sin and you're going to go to hell. And to, if you're preaching sin and you're like, because maybe you're afraid to have the conversation about sex, or you were taught that it's just a sin and you just have to hold it all together until you get married. Don't do it until you're married. And then all of a sudden you're supposed to have this great sex life. And so, it's this place where we get this opportunity to teach our kids, hey, sex is a beautiful gift. And when it's protected in, a mutual relationship, that's when it gets to be experienced in a powerful way, because it is a powerful gift.
Yeah.
And so powerful that the enemy will do anything to distort it.
And I think it is important to explain to them how powerful sex is, because there's a reason why the Apostle Paul talks about sex and food as the things where he basically says everything's permissible. 1 Corinthians 6, everything's permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Then he goes on to talk specifically about food and sex and says that those things are made for the body. The body's not made for those things. The point being, we're to master those things as opposed to being mastered by them.
Yeah.
Our appetites are something we can learn to manage instead of always being managed by our appetites. And so it's important, I think, also to talk to young men and women about the power of sex, because the emotional power of it, the physiological power of it, the cognitive power of it is designed on purpose to bring people together into oneness. And so if they understand it's a powerful thing, it's kind of like handing somebody, I hate all the metaphors, but like handing somebody, dynamite without explaining to them the power of it, then they're not going to be as wise and cautious and caretaking of it. And so talk to them about that power that Polly talked about. I want to take just a parenthetical moment to talk to Claire, who's asking about sending this to, and I think you said alienated young adult kids. And let me address that in a more general way. I think, and it's a good illustration of really part of what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
If Claire, if you're alienated from your kids, as I understand by that, I don't think I would send any video or teaching to them without first gaining permission from them to do that.
Yeah.
If there's some kind of break in that relationship, or even if you're hesitant to send a video, I'd have conversation first that would ultimately lead to the opportunity to send a video. But sometimes just to send a video without relationship or without the conversation can make someone can create a defensive reaction in them.
Yeah.
Or they might feel shame, like Polly was talking about in the conversation about sex, where if we're not careful, they can feel shame. So if this content would be helpful to them, it might be helpful to first engage in a conversation, explain why. I say that's important in this conversation is that similar to how we training people about dealing with sex and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
It's never a question of this is what I want, I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
It's a question of mutuality, which is kind of the ultimate context for healthy sex, is mutuality, and it's about mutual submission and mutual generosity.
Yeah.
And so, Claire, not to make those too much of a comparison, but to say that really in these kind of meaningful moments of human relationship, that willingness to submit to one another, that willingness to enter each other's worlds gently and almost with fear and trembling, but certainly with respect and honor,
mm-hmm.
to say, what we're training kids isn't just about don't have sex, but about what we're telling them is sex is this powerful thing that's designed for the good of your being and for the good of your relationship. And done healthily, it really can produce a deeper and stronger relationship when there's mutuality, when there's respect, when there's honor, when there's permission on both sides.
Because everything is communication. And, I want to talk to both sides. Or there's more than one side that, some of y'all are raising, Bethany, you're talking about, you're walking your guys through some puberty and stuff right now. And so everything is communication. And when they see healthy connection, when they see healthy conversations that just happen because there's so many things that are said without words, they get to experience true connection. And when we grow up, when we haven't seen that, when we've got, just, alienation with our kids, or we've got, discord or all this stuff, or like, I raised my kids up in the purity culture, and had some apologizing to do, and we're still navigating some of that, but it is that place of, it's like, okay, so it's that going, okay, so this is where I am with my family, but everything is communication. And so our kids are going to go after what they didn't get.
Yeah.
And so connection, if they didn't get to see healthy confrontation and, connection, they're craving it. It's something inside of them that is desired, because we're all created for a beautiful, healthy connection. And then it gets distorted along the way, and it can get confused within the sex and sexuality of going, okay, I didn't get nurture. I didn't get masculinity. I didn't get initiative. So I didn't get a healthy father, a healthy mother. I'm going to go after what I am lacking, but I don't know that consciously.
Right.
I just know that I'm drawn to something that I'm needing that I didn't get.
All appetites are deficit based. In other words, we have appetites because there's something we're missing. We're hungry because we're missing food. We're thirsty because we're missing, water. And the thing is that most sexual appetites aren't based on the absence of sex. They're based on the absence of emotional needs being met.
Yeah.
And so Polly said this before we got started tonight. And I thought it was so important to say, one of the crucial things that we need to do, I always say that we teach our family more about God by what we do than by what we say.
Yes.
And the way we engage our kids satisfies their important part of connection. They're either going to crave something because they're not getting the legitimate connection, or they're going to understand and go, okay, that's important for me to guard that, but my heart's satisfied in the connection I have in my family. Mm-hmm. So I'm not searching for something outside of my family and in these kind of areas of sexuality that I should have gotten emotional needs met in another way.
Yeah.
And so I'm watching our time.
Yeah.
And so I want to go back to the masturbation thing.
Yes.
Because that's also, again, every time we talk to people, whether it's about masturbation, pornography, or other forms of sexual expression that are outside of the healthy design of two become one, then part of what we have to tell people is that it's always about emotional needs far more than it's about orgasms.
Yeah.
So I want to come back and talk about masturbation and just say a couple key things. Some of you are fortunate enough that your kids come to you and they say, this is something I did, or this is something someone talked to me about, or I'm coming to understand masturbation. And I think it's crucial, again, the conversation with them. And I'm simply going to tell you what I believe. Some of you may have been taught other things. I would say, go back to the scriptures yourself and look and see. But I'm going to tell you that masturbation isn't a sin. And one of the reasons I say that is there's plenty of evidence that even children in the womb touch themselves and stimulate themselves. I don't think that's a sinful act. I think it's an act of discovery that says, oh, my body, in the same way a child might suck their thumb, or they might, kind of rub the back of their neck, they might discover that there's, pleasure when they touch themselves in a certain way. Here's the difficulty with that, is that, again, as we've said, the number one sex organ in both genders is the mind, not the genitals. And so when we're talking about masturbation, go back to Paul's statement that nothing, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. And his point is that we're not supposed to be run by our body. We're supposed to run our body.
Yeah.
And that being the case, the real difficulty with masturbation isn't whether or not it happens, but whether or not it controls you.
Yeah.
Because most of the time when someone's engaged in self-stimulation like that, there's also thoughts that go with that, and emotions that go with that, and imagery and or other behavior like porn use or things like that. And so the question isn't, does somebody masturbate, but what are they doing when they masturbate?
Yeah.
Is their mind becoming compulsive about it? Are they having fantasies that are harmful to their own being to fantasize certain things? Are they becoming obsessive about both the orgasm effect and whatever else they might do leading up to that? And so the key isn't don't masturbate. The key is understand that occasionally masturbation is an appropriate and healthy release, but as an obsession, as a compulsive behavior, as something that accompanies pornography use, as something that accompanies obsession with another person, those are all ways that we make a connection, because remember, sex is about connection. And when we masturbate and connect to something or someone in an inappropriate way mentally, it still becomes a harmful thing.
Yeah.
So that conversation with your children or someone else's children about masturbation is crucial, not to immediately go, just don't do it, or
right.
Yeah, just do it all the time. but to understand what's really happening in their mind and in their heart and in their thought process, without really going into so much detail that you embarrass them. Help them understand it's not supposed to control them. And if it seems to be controlling them, then the conversation goes into what's the emotional need that's not being met.
Right.
Not why can't they stop touching themselves, but what's the emotional need that's not being met. Yeah. So I think we probably ought to.
Yeah. There's so much more to talk about.
So much.
Yeah. So we are so grateful you guys joined us for this series, and we do not know what our next series is.
We don't know.
But we will figure it out.
We will let you guys know by the time you hear from us next.
Yes. And, please feel free to, just make some comments. If you have any questions, we go back and answer them when we can. And we're just grateful for you guys.
Okay.
So y'all have a wonderful night. That felt like really abrupt, didn't it?
It did.
It did. Yeah.
We've got some stuff scheduled this evening.
So y'all have a wonderful evening, and thank you again for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.